Welcome to the Unshackled Life podcast. Real talk about faith, freedom, and following Jesus. I'm Dalen Woodard, and I'm glad you're here. Whether you've been walking with Jesus for years or you're just trying to figure out what's real in a noisy world, this space is for honest conversation, raw reflection, and truth that sets us free. Let's get into today's episode. Today's episode is a little different. I want to respond to a YouTube comment that came in on a recent episode, Hope for Chaos Junkies, because I think it raises a really important question. Here's the comment. Faith, freedom, and following? Do you mean you are free to give up your freedom, your own thoughts, your own imagination, your own will, and your own body so you can be submissive to the will of another? Freedom is the power or right to act, speak, or think without restraint. It is the state of being free from confinement or control. The state or fact of being free from servitude, constraint, inhibition, etc. Liberty. Christianity quite plainly teaches you to serve, constrain, and inhibit. Man, I wish people were free from these mental traps. And honestly, I appreciate that. Not because I agree with it, but because it reveals something that a lot of people think, even if they don't say it out loud. What do we actually mean when we talk about freedom? Because if we're using different definitions, we're going to talk right past each other. Most people define freedom as this commenter did, as the dictionary does, as the ability to think what you want, do what you want, live how you want, without restraint. And at first glance, that sounds right. It sounds like freedom. But if we're honest, just looking at real life, that definition starts to break down pretty quickly. Because let me ask you something. If freedom is just doing whatever you want, then why are there laws to make certain things out of bounds, even in free countries? Why do so many people feel stuck doing the very things they hate? Why do people keep going back to habits they said they were done with? Why does anger flare up even when you don't want it to? Why does anxiety take over when you'd rather have peace? Why is it so hard to walk in love instead of selfishness? That's not theoretical. That's real. And it starts to expose something. Maybe doing whatever we want doesn't actually mean we're free. The Bible approaches this from a completely different angle. It doesn't start with the assumption that we're free. It starts with the diagnosis that we're not. Jesus said, "Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin." That's a strong statement, but it lines up with what we experience. Because sin doesn't just show up as bad choices. It shows up as patterns, impulses, things that feel like you, but don't actually obey you. And that's the difference between freedom and slavery. A slave doesn't just do something once by choice. They're bound to it and compelled by it. And if we're honest, a lot of what we call freedom today looks a lot like bondage with better branding. Now, the commenter also brought up something important. This idea that Christianity is about giving up your will, your thoughts, your body to submit to someone else. And there's truth in that. There is surrender in following Jesus. But here's the question that changes everything. What are you surrendering to? Because we talk about surrender like it's automatically bad. But that assumes that everything we're currently submitted to is good. And that's just not reality. Everyone is mastered by something. As Dylan said, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. It might be sin. It might be approval. It might be comfort. It might be fear. It might be any number of things. But nobody is just completely, perfectly, independently free in the way we like to imagine or define freedom. So Christianity doesn't come along and say, hey, take your perfect freedom and give it up. It says, you're already being shaped, driven, and controlled by things you didn't choose as independently as you think, and they're not leading you anywhere good. And then it offers something different. Not less freedom, real freedom. Freedom not just to do what you want, but freedom from the things that have been driving you to do what leads to destruction and death rather than life. Freedom from sin, freedom from guilt, freedom from being driven by impulses you can't actually master on your own. Jesus said, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Not partially free, not theoretically free, actually free. So maybe the issue isn't that Christianity teaches constraint. Maybe the issue is that we've confused unrestrained with free. Because those are not the same thing. Unrestrained just means nothing is stopping you. But freedom means nothing is forcing you. And those are very different realities. Freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want. It's the ability to do what will bring about the best outcome, what produces life, without being controlled by what doesn't. And that's what Jesus actually offers. Not suppression, not the loss of your mind or personality or identity, but restoration and renewal. Clarity, new desires, a changed heart. Not perfection overnight, but a real, growing freedom that shows up in how you live. And I'll say this too. If your experience with Christianity has felt like pressure, control, shutting down your thoughts, suppressing who you are, God doesn't shut us down. He gives us the ability to choose life and the self-control to shut ourselves down. But that's not always true of people, even people in the church, where it can become about imposing compliance. A lot of people haven't seen the real thing. They've seen a distorted version of it forced upon them by others. But what Jesus actually offers isn't a smaller life. It's one abundant and worth living. It's a free one. Not free to self-destruct. Free to finally live the way you were created to live, without the chains that have been shaping you all along. Many of us celebrated self-destruction because we had no ability on our own to do anything differently. That's definitely how I saw it when living under my personal rebel flag. There are areas and ways that liberty is restricted in freedom. I mentioned laws in a free society earlier, and that's because even in a perfect free society, freedom would have boundaries. You're free to do what's good, right, or at least neutral. You're not free to steal, kill, or destroy. And nobody rationally calls that oppression. It's understood. Freedom doesn't mean you get to steal or kill or destroy things that aren't yours to destroy. Christianity is not only not different, God is the source of morality. Without a God of consistency, order, and goodness, there's nothing to say that right and wrong aren't just opinions and preferences. So yeah, there are restrictions from the things that bring destruction and death to others and even to ourselves. But here's the thing. With God, you're still free. How? Because although He could, God doesn't override your will and force your compliance. You are free to do what's good and loving and right and even neutral. And while you're not free to choose things that are destructive without consequences, you actually have more freedom with Jesus than ever without Him. And part of that is because while He doesn't force us to do what's right, what is good, what is loving, and what will lead to life, He does empower us to do so. Grace is not the freedom to sin. Grace is the freedom to say no to sin. I spent a lot of time in the self-sabotage section of music. It's a recurring theme because rock has long been the home for that specific brand of honest, messy self-destruction. Songs about being your own worst enemy, about hurting yourself just to feel something, about being trapped in your own mind and unable to stop doing what is making life miserable. And the reason those songs hit so hard, the reason those songs are so popular, is because they're true. Like the truth from Linkin Park's song Crawling, there's something inside me that pulls beneath the surface, consuming, confusing. This lack of self-control I fear is never ending. And later in that same song, crawling in my skin, these wounds, they will not heal. Fear is how I fall, confusing what is real. And how many of us relate to Nikki Sixx's spoken word song, Life After Death, that begins, so we're at the end, and at the same time, we're at the beginning of this misadventure. Why I had to go down a dead-end street at 200 miles an hour, screaming for vengeance and embracing death, that's still something I'm trying to figure out. You know, part of me thinks this is some big master plan to expose the raw nerve endings of dysfunction so I can heal. But you know, addicts, we think everything's about us, don't we? So many of us riding toward destruction have celebrated and embraced the idea of ride it till the wheels fall off, of just do whatever you can to enjoy the ride the best you can on the way out because we can't or couldn't find a break and stop, because we couldn't heal or escape from the brokenness and pain that life without God brings. There are areas in my heart and life where without the grace of God, I am absolutely my own worst enemy, and I'm attracted to things that kill me and do me harm and bring harm to others. And no, I'm not free to do those things, for which I say, thank you, Lord. Seriously, it's a frequent prayer of mine to say, Father, I'm grateful for the grace not to do what I want to do today. Love that isn't freely given isn't love. So God doesn't force us, but He does set us free from being forced to do what we hate and what's killing us, while freeing and empowering us to do what's life-bringing and loving. So yeah, faith, freedom, and following Jesus. Not giving up freedom, finding it. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Unshackled Life podcast. If it encouraged, blessed, or challenged you, consider following the podcast and sharing it with someone you feel it might bless or help. Be blessed, and remember, when you fix your thoughts on God and build your thinking on the foundation of His truth, God fixes your thoughts.